Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Yud in Nidrim. As we continue the subject of Yadot, the Yad of Nidrim, and we'll get today into Kinuyim also. So we have basic Nidrim, Kinuyim, and Yados. So the Gemara over here said that is our Mishnah going like Rav Meir or like Rav Yehuda? Is it better not to make any Nidrim at all, or only Nidavos? But it's mashma from the Gemara about Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Meir, the Brisa that talks about Tova Shalot Tidor, that neither one encourages Nadarim. There's no difference between Nadarim and Nadav. So the Gemara says, no, it could come out like Rav Meir first, particularly like Rav Meir, where Rav Meir is only speaking about an neder, when he said it's better not to make any kind of neder. But in Nadav you could make, and that's what we said, Nidvas Ksherim, that's okay. Can Nidvosam of a kosher is good. Nidvosam of a Russia doesn't make any sense, that's not a neder. But Kenidra Rishon makes that makes sense, but Knidrei Ksherim lo Merklum, because Ksherim don't make Nadarim, but they do make Nadavos. Rishon make Nadarim and don't make Nadavos. So the Gemara, that was one answer. The Gemara said to come out like Meir. Then the Gemara said at the end of the daf, come out like Rabbi Yehuda. When Rabbi Yehuda said it's better to make a neder and fulfill it, better than not making a neder. In other words, what's your choice? Make a neder and fulfill it. Make a neder and don't fulfill it, or don't make any Nadarim at all. Rav Yehuda said better don't make any at all. Rav Meir said rather better not to make any Nadarim at all. But the first shot the Gemara was okay, don't make Nadarim, but a double you could make. Or you could say the Mishnah goes like Rav Yehuda. When Rav Yehuda says better to make a neder and fulfill it, he's not talking about a neder, he's talking about a nedava. Kiyam at the top of the page, I feel to Rav Yehuda, the very top of Yud. Kiyam Rav Yehuda ben nedava ben neder lo amar. He wasn't talking about a neder. And Meir Ran explains that when it comes to neder, he agrees with Rav Meir, better not to make any neder at all. Don't make a neder and don't fulfill it. And a dava you could make, because in a dava, if you give it your free will offering, it's a free will offering. And if we're talking about an animal where you set it up, as we'll see, you set it up that you couldn't make any takala, so then it'll be okay. Like we explained yesterday in Hillel Azaka, here the Gemara is going to say the same thing in Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara says, no, if Tani told me no, Tani no Makayim. When Rabbi Yehuda says it's better to make a neder and fulfill it, he doesn't mean a neder, it means a nedava, no of Makayim. This is where we left off yesterday. Maishna noted the law, why shouldn't you make a neder? Because maybe you won't fulfill it. Like we said yesterday, maybe you won't bring it in 3 regalim and it'll come out a mishap. Another shot was that maybe you'll come to work with it if it's in a dava. That's the same thing. It's by a dava. By neder, maybe you won't bring it on time. The dava and maybe you'll come to call it. Either you won't bring it on time, or you might come to do work with it because you said harezu. So the answer is Rabbi Yehuda Tamei the Amar Ada maybe gives us a Lazara. Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara said the same story yesterday in Hillel Azaken, but rather, since we're talking about Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara would rather say Rabbi Yehuda goes according to his own shita, his own opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Tamei the Amar Ada maybe gives us a Lazara. You bring your kevis, you bring your shepsel, your lamb to the Azara, and there you're makdashit. In other words, what's the concern? And maybe you'll have an animal, you didn't bring it for 3 months, and you don't bring it on time, and you'll be over in Baal Ta'achar. No. What you do is you're not makdashit yet. If you're not makdashit, there's no obligation to bring a carbon, right? We're not talking about a chiv, we're talking about a free will offering that you gave of your own volition, like an ola or a shlamim. So he says, bring your kevis, bring your sheep as it is, in a state of chulin, in a non-holy state, in a secular state, to the Azara. Umakdisha, you're makdishit there in the Azara. This, I actually bring chulin Azara, as we said, you bring it to the gate, let's say you're makdishit, you do smicha, and you shech it right there. So the same thing we said in Hillel Zaken, we're saying here that Hillel holds that too. So there's no concern about an adava, because you're actually bringing this animal. You see, when you say I take it upon myself to bring a carbon at some time during the day, but I don't have the animal right now. By an adava, you have the animal, but the way to avoid any problems is don't be makdashit until you come to the base of Mikdash. So the Gemara says the same thing we saw yesterday when we explained it in Rav Meir. Tenach nedava, the karbanos, that's fine for a carbon. You make sure you're not you don't have any takala, because you're not makdashit until you come to the base of Mikdash. So there's no concern about delaying it for 3 regalim. But the Nadav and Naziris make them make. What's seen in Nadav and Naziris and the neder of Naziris? Once you're a Nazir, you're a Nazir. So what's the concern? Maybe you'll be at the color, you're going to drink wine or something. What's seen as the neder of Nadav? So Rabbi again, Rabbi the time Rabbi Omer, Chasidim Rishon Misavam Lavi Carbon. Yesterday we said this in Shimon HaTzadik. You remember Shimon HaTzadik says, what's seen a neder and a Nadav by a Nazir? A nazir stam, he makes a netter, but there was a special tzaddik, a fine boy who came from the south, remember, and he saw his beauty, and he was afraid he would go to do bad things. So he said, I'm doing it l'shem shemayim. So only Shimon HaTzadik said that's the only kind of asham, and then that guy became tamei, and he had to bring an asham because a nazir who comes tamei has to bring an asham. That's the only asham nazir that I ever ate from, because I know that he meant it l'shem shemayim. That's what Shimon HaTzadik said. Here, Rabbi Yehuda is saying a similar thing, but he says Chasidim Rishonim Hayimus Aven Lahavi Karban Chatas. They used to want to bring a Karban Chatas to Shvi and Akash Baruch maybe to Kol Yidem. God knew that if they were tzaddikim, that they knew that no mishap would happen if they brought a carbon. In other words, they wanted to bring a chatas and they were never able to because they didn't sin. Because Baruch would not bring it to Kol and afraid that maybe they'll wait 3 regalim. He would make sure that no mayos. So what do they do? Yes, if you want to bring a chatas, how do you bring a chatas? You sin b'shogeg. Well, number one, they wouldn't sin, and if they sinned to bring a carbon, that would be they did it on purpose. It would be amazing, right? So how would they ever bring a chatas? They never sinned. They never sinned b'shogeg. So what are they mayosin? Haya omdin u'misnadman is this, they would become a nazir. L'makom to a bar shalom kadesh she's chayav carbon chatas. Because as we said, when a nazir finishes a standard 30 days or whatever time he made, he could be a nazir for a year, for half a year, too, whatever amount he had. Minimum is 30 days. Stam nazir is 30 days based on the kadoshi agal sev gashi is gematria 30. So it's 30 days. So they would do is now a regular sin they wouldn't do. They're not going to eat chayil chassav. They're not going to do something like that. But if you're a nazir, when you finish your nazir, you have to bring in all the chatas and shlamim, 3 karbanos. Nazir is patara. You finished it properly. Well, so this would have bring sheslam makom. That's what Rabbi Yehuda used to say. So the answer is, what's it seen in Neder and Adava? If they were chasidim, they meant to do it l'shem shemayim, similar to what Shimon HaTzadik told about the boy from the south, that he did it l'shem shemayim. So here also he says, what's in a Neder? I understand there's in Neder and Adava by carbon. Neder is harei alai. I don't have the animal here, but I said I'll bring a carbon, and then you might delay. In the Dava, I'm bringing this carbon. How do you avoid any problems? By bringing it to the base mission, this being makdish it there. But by Naziris, what are you going to say? What's from seeing the end of Dava? The answer is the Stam guy makes another. He's menader. He gives a Naziris, not especially at Tzaddik. He just felt, he was did a lot of bad stuff, so he'll be a Nazir. But the Hasidim or Rishonim, the early pious ones, they wanted to bring a chatas, and they had no way to do it because they never sinned. So what they did is they become a Nazir. So they did l'shem shemayim. That answers the question. However, the Gemara just says, Reb Shimon disagreed with that. Reb Shimon says, lo nadr nazir. He says, that's wrong. Ella, rotzala v'ola, you couldn't be a nazir. Why? Because it's wrong to be a nazir is really a sinner, because he abstained from wine. Hashem said, drink wine, make kiddush, enjoy life, have Diet Coke, whatever you want to drink. And he didn't want to enjoy the goodness that God gave us. So Reb Shimon says, that's a sinner. Lo nadr nazir, Ella. If you wanted to bring an ola, misnadav maybe you could make an I want to bring a korban. That's okay. You want to bring a shlamim, misnadav maybe you could do that too. You can make it a dava and say I'm bringing the shlamim, and you bring it to the base mikdash makdish there. Toda, you want to bring a korban toda, which is a kind of a shlamim but different rules. V'arba and lachman, it comes with 4 different kinds of breads, or 1 kind of chametz and 3 kinds of matzah. Total of 40 loaves, 10 of each kind. Misnadav maybe. They wouldn't. Why? They shouldn't be called a sinner. After you bring your karbanos, it says over there, and you will atone asher chata ala nefesh. Now the Gemara is going to ask in a few minutes. That pasuk is really speaking about a nazir who became tamei and he finished. But still, we'll see why it applies even to a regular nazir also. And he will atone for him, for the one who sinned. How did he sin? He sinned by abstaining from wine. God told it's not a good idea to become a nazir. Special people come in a nazir for different reasons, right? They did the Shem Shemayim especially, but it's not a good idea to do that. So Shimon says they did, these pious ones did not become a nazir. Maybe that kid from the south, he was a special thing because the Yetzer Hara grabbed a hold of him, and he felt the only way he could counter it was to become a nazir. But normally you shouldn't become a nazir. That's what Shimon says. Amar Abaye. Abaye now says, Shimon HaTzadik, Reb Shimon, Reb Lazar Kapper, these 3 rabbis, Kulan Shita Achasein, they all agreed that a nazir is considered a sinner. Now, it's not really 100%, all three don't hold the exact same thing, because Shimon HaTzadik yesterday was talking about a Nazir who became Tameh. A Nazir who became Tameh is a sinner. Why? Because he says, why is he a sinner and not a regular Nazir? What's the difference between that and a regular Nazir? A regular Nazir figures he can handle 30 days, I can do that. But a Nazir who became Tameh, what happened? Why did he become a Nazir? Because he felt he sinned, right? Then, so he regrets what he did. Then when he becomes Tameh and he has to start all over again, then he gets upset. Oh, look what I did. 30 days I could do. I can't do 60 days or 45 days. I can't do more than that. And then he regrets his Nazirus, and it's as if he's bringing Chun Lazar. It's not really regular carbon. He didn't really get relief from the rabbi. The rabbis wasn't matzir his neder. They didn't permit his neder because he didn't go rabbi. But it's like he's not really a Nazir because he regretted the whole thing. And then if he regretted the whole thing, the karbanos are almost like Chul Nazara. And that's how he's a sinner. He's bringing in karbanos when he shouldn't be bringing karbanos. So Shimon HaTzadik was only talking about a Nazir who became Tameh. Whereas over here, Reb Shimon says nobody should become a Nazir, even a regular Nazir. And Reb Lazar Kappas is going to say the same thing. But they all say that there is that there is a sin, that becoming a Nazir does involve a sin. That's what he means to say. That they all agree with that. Like Kula and Shavan, the Ikachet, there is a sin when it comes to Naziris, except Shimon HaTzadik says the sin is only if you become Tameh. Because then if he becomes Tameh, a regular Nazir becomes Tameh, he says, oh my gosh, it's not 30 days, I got to do another 20 days or whatever it was, as many days as he did till now, then he's got to start all over again. So he's got a lot more days. He is a sinner. Whereas Reb Shimon and Reb Lazar Kappas says every Nazir is a sinner. Kulin Shita Achasein, right? The Nazir Chote, that a Nazir, some kind of a Nazir is a sinner. They all agree with that. Shimon HaTzadik, we said it on Middays yesterday, told the story of the kid from the south. He says that's the only Asham Nazir that I ever ate, because every other Asham of a Nazir, I didn't trust that it's really an Asham. I felt like the guy regretted the whole story, and I wouldn't eat from that carbon at all. I refrained to eat from it. So he held that a Nazir Tameh Stam is a Chote, but a regular Nazir is not a Chote. So Reb Shimon, that's Reb Shimon HaTzadik. Reb Shimon just said on this page, a few lines above, Shimon said that the early Hasidim did not make another Nazir because they didn't want to become, you want to bring an Ola or a Shlomim or a Toda, you could do that. That's okay. But Naziris you shouldn't be. Why? Because a Nazir is a sinner. As the Pasuk says, you sin. So Reb Shimon says even a Stam Nazir is a sinner. So Reb Shimon HaTzadik we had yesterday. Reb Shimon we had today. Reb Lazar Kappa we're going to have now. Reb Lazar Rebbe, the Tanya, Reb Rebbe, the Tanya we learn like this. Reb Lazar Kappa, Rebbe Omer, and the Nazir should atone for the sin on the soul. So what sin did he? Who did he sin against? Did he steal somebody's money? Did he hurt somebody? He suffered himself. He caused himself to suffer from not drinking wine. They didn't have other drinks in those days. The water was filthy. Wine was basically the drink, right? So he was mitzvah himself. Right? And Hashem said, listen, I gave you wine to drink. What are you being mitzvah yourself? What are you doing more than God? It's like a person who fasts every day. And then the Gemara darshans even more. This guy only refrained from drinking wine. Nikrachot is considered a sinner. If you refrain from eating everything, you would go into fasting. That's considered a sin. From here you see, if you fast every day, you're a sinner. Now again, tzaddikim fasted for certain reasons. The tzibur fasts to beseech God for mercy when we need something, right? When there's an Eis Sarah. But stam a guy who fasts all the time, that's considered a sinner. Because even if you refrain from drinking wine, you're considered a sinner, right? You don't have to go to a funeral from Tamil Mace and you don't have to cut your hair. But stopping from drinking wine, God gave you wine, and you're saying, no, I don't want God's goodness. That's considered a sinner. So we see over here that three people, Rav Shimon HaTzadik yesterday, Rav Shimon today, and Rav Lazar Kappa just now, they all hold that a Nazir in some form is a sinner, except Shimon HaTzadik was only a Nazir who was Tameh. The other two, Rav Lazar Kappa and Rav Lazar Kappa and Rav Shimon hold that any Nazir is a sinner. Says the Gemara, how are you learning out from V'chipur Love Me'asher Chata Ala Nefesh, which was quoted both by both Rav Shimon and Rav Lazar Kappa, that any Nazir is a sinner? But that pasuk is speaking about only a Nazir became Tameh. If he became Tameh, he sinned by becoming Tameh. Even B'shogeg, he became by becoming Tameh while he was a Nazir. But I think Rabbi Nazir Tameh said The answer is Mishum Deshana B'Cheitu. He repeated the sin. What do you mean repeated the sin? He had two sins. Number one, that he was Matzar himself, that he held back from drinking wine. And number two, they become Tamei. After he became a Nazir, says two things here. So he says, and the Ron explains, because it says Ala Nefesh. Why does it say V'chiper alav me'ashachata? Just say V'chiper ashachata. And this will atone, these karbanos will atone for him for his sin. We're talking about the karbanos that he brings, including the asham, after he became a Nazir, after he became Tamei. Fine. So just say V'chiper alav me'ashachata. He will atone because he sinned. What's the Ala Nefesh? That extra word is teaching me that they were talking about two things. So if it was only from the sin of becoming Tamei while he was Nazir, because you said he sinned. He was a Nazir, wasn't supposed to become Tamei, and he became Tamei. That's a sin. Why say Ala Nefesh? To include even a regular Nazir. Even before he became Tamei, he sinned for abstaining from wine. Don't abstain from what God gave you. God gave you goodness, you should enjoy it. Omer says the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, this is really part of the first Mishnah, because the first Mishnah, remember, we described, we said, Kol, Kinuye, Nadarim, Kinadarim, Macharam, Macharam, Shvus, Shvus, and then we wanted to explain Yados, which we've been talking about Yados until now. Now we go back to Kinui. Kinui means a substitute, a nickname for the Karbanos. And again, Stam, how do you become how do you make a netter? By saying this thing is also to me. Remember, netter you answer the chayfetz on you, as opposed to a shvur where you answer yourself on the chayfetz. So here, when it talks about a neder, right? So you have to the ikar neder is that you say this is also to me like a carbon. Okay, but we wanted to change. We'll see. A kinui is you don't use the lashon of carbon, but use some other lashon. So Omer lechavero konem. Konech, kones, these are strange words which don't apparently mean anything. These words, konim, they're similar to the word carbon, as we'll see. Why did they pick those words? We'll see. They're either foreign words, like in the vernacular of that nation, they use for the word carbon, they use the word konem or konech or kones, or it's a special lesson that the Chachamim shows. Instead, don't use the word carbon. We'll see why. We explained it before. We'll see why again. Hare elu kuni carbon or cherek, cheref. Cherek, cheref, these are those are substitute words for the word chay. Remember in our Mishnah we said a kini of a netter is netter, a kini of a charm is like from shvuas, and zero. So here we say also the kini, and we don't use lashon of carbon in Mishnah, we use netter, but how do you make a netter? By saying it's like carbon. So instead of using the word carbon, if you use the word konem or konech or kones, or that's like saying carbon. If you said cherek, that's like saying the word cherem. Nozik, Nazir, that's like saying nose. In both those cases, you have a Zion like Nazir, in the second case, you have the Ches like Cherem. In the first ones, you have Kuf, all of them like carbon. Right? Shvusa, Shvuka, those are kinim for Shavua, Shavusa, Shvuka, or he says no der b'moi, or you swore by Moi. Moi is like Momo, but they talk about in Israel. If you have a name Shlomo, they call you Momo. It's a nickname, like Avi for Avram, or don't say it for Ephraim. That's all I should have said. Kobe for Yaakov. So for Shlomo, a lot of it is Momo. Right? So they say, so that's here it's Mohi. So Shvua, Shvuka, that's a Shvua, or Noder b'moi. Now he says Noder, but again, Noder here does not mean made a netter, it means a Shvua, because we're talking about Shvuas. How do you? We gave three examples of kinuyim for carbon, 3 for cherem, 3 for nazir, and now we have 3 for shvua. Shvua says shvuka are the first two, and then it says you swore by Moshe. Now why by Moshe? We'll talk about that strange thing. What do you mean Moshe? Did Moshe make a shvua? Yes, he did. The Gemara will explain what's the no of moi, but the Mepharshim say right away that noder doesn't mean netter. We had back on Chesam and Aleph in the second of the wide lines there, where the Ran said, "Kedashim b'duchti tuba," to correlate the shvu and netter. Many times the shvu is called a netter, and vice versa. So here he really means a shvu. Okay, so these are substitute lashonos. These are mamish like a netter. We said yad is learned out of a drasha. What about kinuyim? So the Gemara says, how do we get to these substitutes? Itmar kinuyim. Rabbi Yochanan Lashon was saying is mamish a doraisa. It's just saying it in a different lashon. It's like we said, the Gemara in Sota talks about things you could say in the vernacular. You don't have to say it in Hebrew. So you're also, it's not in Hebrew, it's a foreign language. That's how you say carbon in French or or whatever, or Croatian, or whatever language you read. It's just saying it in a foreign language. It's the foreign word for carbon. It's like saying in English, you say sacrifice, right? This is also to me like a sacrifice. So that's saying that's what a kinu is. Shem Malaki says no. Lashon Shabbarim Chacham. It's lashon that the Chachamim devised. They made up this lashon. They made up those words. Those aren't real words. The Chacham made it up. Why? Instead of using the word carbon, you should use the lashon of that the Chacham shows. Use konem, konech, kones. Why? The pasuk is the pasuk. Do you see where do you find the lashon Shabbadu? B'chodesh Shabbadu Melibo. The month that he chose, that he made up of his own heart, on his own. He devised on his own. The time of my tekim rabbanan kinuyin. So if you say it's a foreign language, okay. I didn't say it in English. I didn't say it in Hebrew. I said it in English. I said sacrifice or kone, some other foreign language. But if it's the Chacham, why did the Chacham make up a special word for it? What's wrong with saying the word carbon? Why did the Chacham say kinuyin? You shouldn't say carbon. Why did the Rabbanan make up the kinuyin? Just say it's carbon. What do you need it for? The Chacham didn't want you to say the word carbon. They don't want to use that word. Carbon. So what's wrong with saying carbon? Carbon means a sacrifice. Carbon Lashem. Because maybe you'll say, I'm bringing it. It should be a carbon Lashem. So what's wrong with saying carbon Lashem? Because we're afraid you'll cut it off. You'll just say Lashem and not say the word carbon. Use God's name in vain. Because you might say God without saying carbon Lashem. V'tanya, we find the same thing. Rav Shimon Omer, Menayim, Shelo Yomer Lashem Ola. How do you know, even if you're bringing in carbon, you shouldn't say, I'm bringing this Ola Lashem. For God, this is an Ola. Lashem Mincha, Lashem Toda, Lashem Shalom. You shouldn't say it that way. You should say rather, Talmud Omar, carbon Lashem, you should say it that way. Why? Because if you say Lashem Ola, maybe you'll say Lashem and somebody will interrupt you and you'll stop and you just stop with saying Hashem's name. You didn't say it's a sacrifice to God or to God a sacrifice. You just said to God. You wanted to say Shem Shemayim for a carbon. You wanted to say Hashem Adon. It's not like we say Hashem. You wanted to say Hashem's name. And you wanted to say it for a carbon. Amr Torah, carbon Lashem, right? You shouldn't say Lashem Ola. You shouldn't say Lashem Mincha. Because you might, and even though your kavanah was good, because you might stop in the middle. So levatolach kam certainly can't say Hashem's name by itself. So the reason that we're just emphasizing this idea that the Chachamim made up the word carbon. You shouldn't come to say carbon Lashem, even though the pasuk is carbon Lashem. You shouldn't say even Lashem. You should definitely not say like Rav Shimon says Lashem carbon because you might stop in the middle. But you shouldn't even say carbon Lashem. Why? Because you also might just skip the word. You skip a word when you say something quickly. You might say Lashem without saying the word carbon. So therefore, the Chacham made up that lashon. Now you could argue and say that if the Chacham made up that lashon, then it's not really a neder d'oraisa, because the Chacham made it up. It's the Chacham neder Torah. It's nothing at all. It's only drabanan. So it's not the same. Maybe you wouldn't be chayav a carbon or malchus if you were over on because you didn't really make a neder Torah. You just said something that the Chacham made up. You can argue that. But Lamaisa, the general opinion is that a kinui is not a strange lashon, the Chacham made up the lashon, but rather it's a vernacular. It's a different language. And if it's a different language, it's a neder Torah. If I say harei azeh like a carbon, if I say this thing is also to me like a carbon, or if I say it's also to me like a sacrifice, that's the same thing. So either way, it would be a neder Torah. So this question of is the kinui? Is it a lashon shabarim chachamim? Is it simply a lashon that the chachamim made up? It's not really a neder min Torah. The chachamim said we don't want you to use the word carbon, so we made up some other name for you to use. Maybe that has the strength of a daraisa also, because they said that's still a neder daraisa. But if you say that it's vernacular, it's the foreign language, then it's for sure a daraisa. But this machlokas, whether it's lashon shabarim or it's simply a foreign language, maybe that's the same as the following machlokas. And as this machlokas, again, the one says maybe that's a machlokas tanam. Instead of why would the Amaram argue if it's machlokas tanam? Where did it? What happens if you made a substitute of a substitute? You have a substitute lashon, like we've been kone, and use a substitute for that for kone. What would you say there? So Bishami says that's also. So Beisil says kinui. That's not a kinui at all. It's nothing. It's not a kinui. My love, the mandam, maybe it's a machlokas. My love, mandam are mandam kinui. If you say it's also ksaver kinui lashon umasain, very simple. It's a lashon umas. It's a foreign language, and this is a kinui of that. So just like you have a foreign language, what makes it a foreign language? The fact that people talk that way, people use it. What makes the word sacrifice? What makes it? Because people use it. There's no kedusha to it. Lashon HaKodesh, the Torah was given to us, Lashon HaKodesh, that has kedusha to it. Hashem said those are the words. But all the other languages that people made up, they made them up on their own. So if they made up this word, they can make up that word. So maybe if you say one holds kinui, the kinui of a kinui is also, he holds, because it's lashon umas. So just like that, just like the kinui is lashon umas, the kinui is also lashon umas. Laman damer mutar, the one that says it's mutar except for lashon shvarim chacham. No, a kinui is a special lashon that the chacham made up. They made up the words konen, konech, etc. They made up those words. Those they made up. They didn't make up the substitutes of those words, and therefore would be mutar. L'chora. So therefore, Beis Hillel l'chora holds that the kinui holds it's lashon shvarim chachamim, and Beis Shammai holds that says that it's also holds that it's a lashon umos, that it's a foreign language. Gemara says, lo, that's not the machlokes between Beis Shammai. Lo b'kuli alma kinui lashon umos. Everybody can hold that it's a foreign language. Beis Shammai savi bahani nam mishto ayamos. Beis Shammai simply held that the people when they in the foreign language not only is a kinui part of the foreign language, the kinui of the kinui is also part of the foreign language. No, those words that mentioned on Mishnah are words used in foreign languages, but the kinuyim of those kinuyim are not used in the foreign language. So everybody can hold that it's a foreign language. So this is seems to be the fact you want to say that Beis Hillel Mishami both hold like Rabbi Yochanan, or rather that like not like Rabbi Yochanan, like Rabbi Yochanan, that it's lashon umos. It's a foreign language. That's what we pass against. And then it's for sure a doraisa according to that idea. You don't have to come on to the idea that it's lashon shvarim chacham, which brings you into the question of it whether would it be a neder doraisa or not. It wouldn't be because the chacham made up those words. So Torah, that's not a neder. Okay. Or you could say boisema, that again everybody holds that it's a foreign language. Beshami Sabri Gazrini Kinuye. Mishum kinuyan. In other words, it's aser, but it's only xera, so it's only drabanan. A kinui would be a daraisa because it's a substitute. It's a foreign language. Whereas the kinui of the kinui is only an aser mishum xera, so we wouldn't really be chayav a carbon or get malchus for that. Ubeisol sabri lo gazrini kinui mishum kinui. We don't make xera at all, and it's mamish mut. If you said the kinui of a kinui, this should be also to me like something, which is that something is a kinui of a kinui. According to Beis Hillel, that wouldn't be a neder at all. Now the Gemara says, what are examples of these? We talked about the Mishnah, what the kinui or what the substitutes are for neder, cherem, nazir, and shua. What are examples of kinui kinuyim? Tanar Rabbi Yosef, mekanmena, mekanchana, mekansana. These are variations of konim, right? Konim, konech, konsa. So you could take another variation and say mekan chana mekansana. What about cherem? Tani mafshah that he was a rabbi, Shem Chacham. This tachrakim is the girsa in the Bach, like tachrakim and charakim and charafim. Again, they all have a ches in it. Remember the kinuyim of carbon all have a kuf start more or less. They start off with a kuf or have a kuf in there. In the kinui of carbon, it's got a kuf in there, but it's got a mem also in front of it. What are the kinuyim of cherem? So he says they're tachrakim, but they all have a ches in it, similar to cherek, cherek, and cheref in the Mishnah. Okay, kinuyim is just what are they? It's Rav Yosef mechazkana, menaschana, and mafichna. Okay, the last one doesn't even have a zayin in it, like nazir, right? But it's a variation of that. Is it a variation of one in the Mishnah? The Mishnah says faziach, so this is a variation maybe of faziach. Mifchaznamai. What happens if you have both a pei and a zayin in there? Or mischaznamai, or mizaznamai. Amalei Ravina Rashi. So these questions were asked, and I didn't really answer them. Ravina Rashi, kinma. What happens if you said kinma? Now, kinma sounds like konen, right? And would that be a variation of the variation? Would that be a substitute of a substitute? We said mekanmana is. What about kinma? My konen b'kamar. Did you really mean that should be also like a carbon? or the substitute word in the Mishnah for a carbon, which is konem. Odilma kinman bosa. Maybe it means sweet cinnamon, like we say in Korbanos every day in Pita Maktoras, right? Kinman besem. Maybe that's kinman means. Maybe it means sweet cinnamon. Come on. Amalei Rav Beredu Rav Chia Rav Ashi kinamai. What does he use the word kina? Kina could also mean lamentation, right? Right? Kina maybe means a chicken nest, a chicken coop, right? A nest. Odilma lashon konem. Maybe it's lashon konem. So the Gemara says here, tiboy, right? You just say he ends off tiboy. Yeah. Come on, it's like teku, right? We said before, it's these questions stand. Kinuye kunim the shvua. What's the example of that? Shavuel, shavusiel, shkukiel. These are variations of a shvua. Okay, because they all have a shin like a shvua. So the Gemara, what do you mean shvuel? How can you say shvuel means a shvua? Shvuel ben Gershom mashma. Maybe there's a guy by the name of Shvuel ben Gershom in Tanakh. Maybe it's him. Maybe that's what we're speaking about over here. Shvuel ben Gershom was a personnel. It's Shvuel ben Gershom. We have a person in Tanakh by that name, so maybe it means that. So in other words, it's more likely that it means that, right? It's not even if you say, it was a suffix what the guy meant, but he used the right lashon. Okay, so you say we're going to say stam nadam lahachmer. But it can go by context. Right. So context. Right. Right. Gershom, right. But you use that word. We're talking about a substitute of a substitute. So yes, maybe it means I don't want to learn Divrei Yomim. Maybe you can't tell from the context. Maybe it's a pasuk in Divrei Yomim. Maybe I don't want to learn that. So why would you use it? It's somebody's name. How do you say that refers to a shvua? Shvua is like Ella shvuvel. Change it. Shvuvel, shvusiel, and shkukel. And he takes out the word mahu. He takes out the word. The Bach takes out that word. He says those are examples of kinuyim of Shmuel. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says that Amar Ashivsa. Shmuel's name also begins with a shin, right? Amar Ashivsa Amar Klum. Ashkika Amar Klum. Karnishna Amar Klum. Those are totally meaningless words. They're not even substitutes of substitutes. Even if you hold that substitutes of substitutes are usher, and we don't hold that way, because we all, like Beisol says, substitutes are mutter, right? But so he says, what's the point? We're saying what's examples of them. The Beishamai would say it's also, but Beisol it's mutter anyway. Another b'moi hareil. So we said neder really means he made a shvua by Moshe. What does it mean? At times shemul yomer haomer b'moi lomer klum. If you just said by Moshe, Moi is a name for Moshe, right? That we explain. It's like Momo. So Moi is a name for Moshe. But if you just said Moshe, that doesn't mean anything. We don't know what you mean. Is that also mutter? What do you mean? Maybe you want to be a tzaddik like Moshe Rabbeinu. But Moshe, the Amar Moi, if you say by the neder that Moshe made, Harei Kunim L'Shvua, I want to swear like Moshe. In other words, Moshe. That's what, and the Ran explains. That's why in the Mishnah it could have just said. Remember, in the Mishnah it says 3 examples. Kon kanach kanas. What are 3 examples of cherem, cherek, cherech, cheref? What are 3 examples of nazir? Nazik, naziach, paziach. Then when it comes to shvu, it didn't give you 3 bum. Shvu is why? Because it would have sounded like Moshe alone is also a shvu just by saying b'moi, which is Moshe's name, right? There's a shin in Moshe also, right? Like, but no, he doesn't mean that. You had to make a netter like Moshe. That's what shvu means to say. If you just say b'moi alone, that's not a shvu. That's why it wasn't mentioned b'moi alone in the Mishnah. You have to say b'mumsa in the shvu, the Amar Moshe, the shvu that Moshe made. I want to make a shvu like Moshe made. That's a kinui for a shvua. That's a mumsa the Mamoi. That's the kinui of a shvua that Moshe made. Where did Moshe make a shvua? And so the Ran and Rashi point out, Ran points out, Moshe made a shvua when he lived with Yisro. It says Vayola Moshe l'sheves hashish. He started to live with Moshe, with Yisro. And Rashi explains the medrash there that he swore that he wouldn't leave Yisro without permission. He wouldn't go to Midian. He wouldn't leave Midian by Yisro without asking for Yisro's permission. So he made a sort of a shvua there, and that's what we mean over here. That if you make what's the kinui of a shvua, where I say a shvua, the mumsa, that kind of that's a kinui for a shvua that Moshe made. The mumsa, the Moshe, that's also a kinui. Says the Mishnah. Ha'omer lachua. Now we're going to get into a tougher area. What do we mean? Now we're talking about examples where you didn't use the word carbon at all, or you didn't use a kinui. It's sort of like yados again. I said this is also, but I didn't use the word carbon. I didn't use one of the kinuyim of carbon, of konem, konech, konem. What were they again? Konem, konech, kones. I didn't use any of those lashons. But what did you say? I said lo chulin. And the Mishnah brings down lo chulin. Now in our Gemara, it doesn't say lo chulin, it says la chulin with a patach. La chulin, the Ran explains, is like lo chulin, meaning lo chulin shacha. What I eat of you shouldn't be chulin, meaning it should be kachim. I can't eat it. It means, it's like a double negative, right? What I eat of you should not be chulin, or not a double negative. It should not be chulin. What should it be? It's not a double negative. It's just a negative. But by saying what I eat of you should not be chulin, that means it should be kachim. That means I can't eat it. That's what we say. Whatever. I don't want to eat in your house. What I eat of your house should not be chulin. Rather, it should be kachim or lo kosher. Shouldn't be kosher for me to eat because it's kachim. Lo dachi, not pure. Again, pure meaning it's mutter to eat. It shouldn't be pure for me to eat. Tahor, the Ran says the lo should go on tahor also. It shouldn't be tahor, but rather it should be. It's kachim is any of kachim is tahor or tameh. It shouldn't be tahor to me, but rather it's also for me to eat. V'tameh, somebody puts the tahor v'tameh, should be tameh. Here it's not lo tahor. It's not lo tameh, but rather it's tameh. Like kachim, kachim can become tameh or not tameh. Right? If it's chulin, it's not really a problem. Chulin, if it's tummy or not. But I say it should be tameh or nos or a pigel. All these lashons are also because in all these are like yodos where I say this should not be chulin, but what should it be? Should be kachim. Shouldn't be kosher. Shouldn't be tar. Should be kachim. Or if I say this is tameh or nos or a pigel to me, means I'm saying that these things are like kachim. What regular food does not become nos or pigel, right? Or tameh could become tameh, but it's not prohibited to eat. But kachim that were tameh or nos or pigel cannot be eaten. So if I say your food to me should be like tameh or nos or pigel, that's also. Now you might say, isn't it like saying chazer? The Ran says. Remember, if I say this is also like chazer, that's not also because the Torah also chazer. I have to say it's also to me like a carbon which became also to me through my own words. So this should not l'chor be also. The answer is we're not sure what he means. Does he mean should be also like automatically coming also, or does he mean like the carbon, like the meat car, like the main part? I mean like a carbon which can become nos or pigel. And since we're not sure, Ron brings down several points. He prays several times. He says here, stam nadarim is lahachmer, and we assume therefore. See, from the context, you can't. Do it mean it should be also to mean like a carbon which became like a carbon which can become noser, or does it mean like noser, like chazer? Can't eat noser, you can't eat chazer, you can't eat noser. The Torah forbade you from eating noser or pigel or chazer. But when astam we mean we go l'chumra, and he meant like a carbon which can become those things, or keimra, like a sheep. And what does it mean? A sheep, a lamb that becomes a carbon, it becomes a carbon toda, kedirim, like the. Dirim means like the karbanos that are kept in the stalls in the Beis Hamikdash. So all these lashons, you say your food should be to me like a noser or pigel. It means like a carbon. Ki'imr, like a carbon, like a carbon toda that you bring every day. Kedirim, like the animals in the stalls of the Beis Hamikdash, which are set for being karbanos. Ke'etzim means like the shnei gzira eitzim, the two logs that are put on the mizbeach, which are also hegdish, which are kadosh. Right? Keishim, like the fire on the mizbeach. Kemizbeach, the mizbeach itself, kehechol, like the hechol, like the stuff in the hechol, meaning like the items in the hechol, or the hechol itself is kachim, is kodesh. So all these things, or kiyerushalayim. What do we mean by kiyerushalayim? Like the korbanos that are brought in Yerushalayim. All those things are also. Those are all nadarim. If I said I swore by one of the service items in the mizbeach, the appenditures in the mizbeach. Even though you didn't say the word carbon here, I raise it never carbon. All these things are like saying I'm swearing by a carbon. I'm making this like a carbon. To me, it's like said, and this should also be like a carbon. If you didn't say ki Yerushalayim, you just said Yerushalayim. That doesn't mean anything. Because he didn't say ki Yerushalayim. If you say ki Yerushalayim, so it means like the korbanos that are brought in Yerushalayim. But if you just said Yerushalayim by itself, that doesn't answer. That's not answer. You'll see in the Gemara. That's pretty much the Yo's meaning. that according to this, Rabbi Yehuda is really explaining the first part of the Mishnah. There's another shita that Rabbi Yehuda is arguing with the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda holds in all these cases, it's not clear that you mean carbon. And even if he said Ki Yerushalayim, it's also not. When he says over here, Yerushalayim means even if you say Ki Yerushalayim, it doesn't mean anything. But the Pashup shot is, the Gemara will explain, that he means if you say Yerushalayim without saying the Chaf. And the same thing with all the other ones. You have to say Ki Imra, Ki Dirim, Ki Eitzim. Like in all these cases, you have to say it should be like those things. When you say it's like those things, I mean that your food should be also to me like a carbon is also to me, because all those are ways of referring to karbanos, like holy things in the base of Mikdash. All those things have kedusha, whether it's karbanos in Yerushalayim or the shnei gziri eitzim or the other things, the appenditures, the appliances used in the base of Mikdash. All those things are kachim. So you say your food should be also to me. It's like you're saying it should be also to me like a carbon. All right, tomorrow's Daf Yud Aleph will be on the podcast. And on Sunday, we'll start from the top of Yud Beis. Actually, the last 4 words on Yud Aleph of the Beis. Shabbat Shalom l'kulam.
Shabbat Shalom, with Shabbos.